She walked into the bank carrying documents in a worn leather folder, wearing a simple dress that had been elegant once but was now dated, her white hair neatly pinned, her movements careful and deliberate, like someone in their 80s who'd learned to navigate a world that moved too fast. The teller looked at her and saw poverty, confusion, someone who'd wandered into the wrong building. When she said she had an appointment with senior management regarding trust documents, the teller called a floor manager who approached with visible irritation. The manager spoke loudly, condescendingly, asking if she understood this was a private wealth management branch for serious clients, not a retail bank for everyday banking. She repeated calmly that she had a scheduled appointment to review trust governance documents and sign updated beneficiary designations. The manager accused her of loitering, of disturbing other customers, of not belonging. Called security. In front of the entire marble lobby filled with wealthy clients, she was escorted out while her documents spilled across the floor. No one helped her pick them up. The manager told her not to return without real identification and real money. She left quietly, collecting her papers on the sidewalk while passers-by stared. Inside, staff laughed nervously and returned to their duties, the manager congratulating himself on protecting the bank's image. That afternoon, a black motorcade arrived. Federal regulators, attorneys, auditors, and the bank's regional director entered with expressions that ended careers. Because the elderly woman they had expelled was Eleanor van der Berg, sole trustee of the van der Berg Family Trust, $40 billion in assets that had been secretly funding the bank's liquidity, expansion, and international operations for decades. She'd come for a routine audit and document signing. Instead, she'd been humiliated and expelled. Her legal team immediately froze the trust's credit line that morning. Within hours, the bank's stock dropped 12%. Emergency meetings were called. International partners withdrew. The branch manager was terminated on the spot. Senior executives were placed on indefinite leave, and Eleanor van der Berg returned to her estate, having reminded an entire institution that dignity matters more than appearance, and that the quietest person in the room sometimes controls everything. Wednesday, November 15th, 2023, 10:47 a.m., Sterling Private Bank, Manhattan Flagship Branch. The bank occupied the ground floor of a glass and steel tower on Park Avenue, its entrance marked by polished brass doors and a logo that whispered rather than shouted wealth. This wasn't a branch for everyday banking. No lines of people waiting to deposit paychecks. No ATMs cluttering the walls. No promotional posters about auto loans. This was Sterling Private Bank, a wealth management institution that served only clients with minimum investable assets of $10 million. The lobby was more art gallery than banking floor, marble imported from Italy, contemporary sculptures positioned strategically, leather seating areas where clients could wait comfortably while financial advisors prepared for meetings. The ceiling soared 20 feet high with recessed lighting that created the impression of wealth managed with sophistication and discretion. Behind the reception desk sat Vanessa Chen, 28 years old, employed by Sterling for 3 years as a client services representative. Her job was to greet visitors, verify appointments, and direct clients to the appropriate advisor. She was good at her job, which meant she was good at assessing people within seconds of seeing them, determining who belonged in this space and who had wandered in by mistake. When Eleanor van der Berg entered at 10:47 a.m., Vanessa made her assessment in approximately 2 seconds. This woman did not belong here. Eleanor was 83 years old, though her bearing suggested someone younger, straight posture, steady gait, clear eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a navy dress that had been expensive 30 years ago, but was now simply dated, low-heeled shoes that prioritized comfort over fashion, and carried a worn leather portfolio that had seen decades of use. Her jewelry was minimal, a wedding ring she'd worn for 60 years until her husband passed, pearl earrings that had been her mother's, a simple watch with a leather band. Everything about her appearance suggested someone who'd been comfortable once, but whose circumstances had changed. Perhaps a widow living on a fixed income. Perhaps someone who'd never quite understood that fashion changed, and her clothing choices now marked her as out of touch. Vanessa didn't see a woman who'd chosen simplicity over ostentation, who'd never felt the need to broadcast wealth through designer labels, who'd been wearing the same style of dress for 40 years because she'd found what worked and saw no reason to change. Vanessa saw someone who looked poor, and poor people didn't bank at Sterling Private. Eleanor approached the desk and spoke with the careful diction of someone from a generation that valued proper pronunciation. "Good morning. I have an appointment at 11 o'clock with Mr. Harrison regarding trust documentation." Vanessa glanced at her computer screen, scrolling through the day's appointments. "What's your name?" "Eleanor Vanderberg." Vanessa typed the name, frowning when nothing appeared in the appointment system. "I don't see any appointment under that name. Perhaps it's listed under the Vanderberg Family Trust, or under my attorney's firm, Morrison and Associates." Vanessa scrolled again. There was an 11 a.m. appointment listed as VDB Trust Document Review, with a note that senior management would be attending, but that couldn't be for this elderly woman who looked like she'd walked in from a senior center. "Are you sure you have the right bank? This is Sterling Private Bank. We handle wealth management for high net worth clients." "Yes, I'm aware. I've been banking with Sterling for 47 years. Vanessa's expression showed polite skepticism. "I see. And you're here for what kind of appointment?" "As I mentioned, I'm here to review and sign updated governance documents for the Vanderberg Family Trust. It's a routine quarterly meeting." "Ma'am, I think there might be some confusion. This branch doesn't handle regular trust accounts. We manage private wealth portfolios, investment strategies, estate planning for..." "I understand what Sterling Private Bank does. My family helped establish this institution in 1876. I'm here for my scheduled appointment with Mr. Harrison." Vanessa decided this woman was either confused or deliberately lying. Either way, she was taking up time that should be spent with actual clients. "Let me get my manager. Please wait here." She picked up her phone and called the floor. Our manager, speaking quietly but urgently. "David, I have a situation at the front desk. Elderly woman claiming she has an appointment about a trust, but I don't think she's a real client. Can you come handle this?" David Morrison, no relation to Eleanor's attorneys, was the branch's floor manager, responsible for ensuring smooth operations and maintaining the bank's image of exclusivity and excellence. He was 34 years old, had worked his way up through Sterling's retail branches before being promoted to the private banking division, and took enormous pride in his position. Managing the flagship Park Avenue branch meant he was responsible for some of the wealthiest clients in New York, and he took that responsibility seriously. When Vanessa called about an elderly woman who didn't look like a real client, David assumed she'd wandered in from the street, perhaps confused about where she was, perhaps with early-stage dementia making her think she had business at a bank she'd never actually used. He approached the reception desk with his professional smile in place. The one that looked friendly, but was really an assessment tool, sizing up whether someone needed help finding the door or actually required services. Eleanor stood patiently, her worn portfolio held against her chest, her expression calm. David's assessment matched Vanessa's. This woman did not belong at Sterling Private Bank. "Good morning," David said, his tone friendly but condescending in the way people speak to elderly relatives who've lost track of reality. "I understand you're looking for someone?" "Yes, I have an 11 o'clock appointment with Mr. Harrison to review trust governance documents." "I see. And your name is?" "Eleanor Vanderberg." David glanced at Vanessa, who shook her head slightly. No appointment found under that name. "Mrs. Vanderberg, I think there might be some confusion. This branch handles private wealth management for clients with significant assets. Perhaps you're looking for one of our retail branches. There's a Sterling Consumer Banking location on 3rd Avenue that handles personal accounts, trusts, estate." "I'm not looking for a retail branch. I'm here for my scheduled appointment at this branch with Mr. Harrison regarding the Vanderberg Family Trust." David's smile became more strained. "Ma'am, I'm trying to help you, but I need you to understand that this facility serves a very specific clientele. If you have a trust account with Sterling, it would be managed through our trust services division, not here. The Vanderberg Trust is managed through this branch. It has been since 1876. Ma'am, this branch opened in 2015. I think you might be confused about... Sterling Private Bank has been operating from this address in various building incarnations since 1876. This current building was constructed in 2015, but The institution has been here continuously. My family was among the founding depositors. David exchanged glances with Vanessa. The woman was clearly living in the past, perhaps mixing up memories from decades ago with present reality. Mrs. Vonderberg, I appreciate your history with Sterling, but I need to ask, do you have an account number or documentation showing you have an active account here? Eleanor opened her portfolio and began pulling out documents. David caught glimpses of aged paper, old-fashioned typesetting, documents that looked like they'd been in that folder for decades. These are my trust documents. They specify quarterly governance reviews, which is why I'm here. Ma'am, those documents look quite old. I don't think they're current. Modern trust documents are digital, updated regularly, not... David gestured vaguely at the papers. Not physical documents from what looks like the 1970s. These documents are original trust instruments from 1876, with amendments from 1903, 1947, 1968, and 2001. They're maintained in physical form, as required by the Trust Charter. Mr. Harrison has copies, obviously, but I'm required to review the original documents during quarterly meetings. This was getting out of hand. David could see other clients in the lobby beginning to notice the conversation. An elderly woman at the reception desk with old papers, staff trying to redirect her elsewhere, the kind of scene that didn't fit Sterling's image of exclusive professionalism. Mrs. Vonderberg, I'm going to need to ask you to leave. You don't have an appointment here. If you have legitimate business with Sterling, you need to contact our customer service line and schedule through proper channels. I did schedule through proper channels. My attorney made this appointment 6 weeks ago. There's no record of any such appointment. Then perhaps your system has made an error. David's patience snapped. He'd spent 10 minutes on this when he should have been preparing for actual client meetings. Ma'am, I've tried to be polite, but you need to leave. This branch is for serious clients with significant assets. I don't know what you think you're doing here, but this is not the place for... He stopped himself before saying, people like you. But the implication hung in the air. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Young man, I'm not leaving until I've attended my scheduled meeting. I've been coming to this bank longer than you've been alive. I would appreciate being treated with basic courtesy. Courtesy? David's voice was rising now, drawing more attention from across the lobby. I've been courteous. I've explained multiple times that you're in the wrong place. You're disrupting our operations and disturbing our clients with this confused insistence that you have business here when you clearly don't. I have documents proving... Those documents are ancient, probably not even valid anymore. Ma'am, I'm asking you nicely one more time. Please leave, or I'll have to call security. Eleanor stood very still, her worn portfolio held against her chest, her 83 years of dignity evident in her posture. If you feel you must call security, then do so. But I'm not leaving voluntarily when I have a scheduled appointment. David pulled out his radio. Security to reception desk. I need assistance removing a trespasser. The word trespasser caused several nearby clients to look up with alarm. Sterling Private Bank did not have trespassers. Sterling Private Bank had carefully vetted clients who arrived by appointment and were treated with impeccable professionalism. Within 2 minutes, 2 security guards arrived, Charles Martinez and Robert Kim, both employed by Sterling for years, both trained to handle situations with minimal disruption. Mr. Morrison, what's the situation? Charles asked. This woman is refusing to leave despite having no appointment and no legitimate business here. She's disturbing clients and disrupting operations. I need her escorted from the building. Charles looked at Eleanor, at her worn clothing and aged documents, and made the same assumption everyone else had. Confused elderly woman, probably wandered in by mistake, needs to be redirected gently but firmly. Ma'am, Charles said respectfully, I'm going to need you to come with me. We'll help you find where you actually need to go. I need to go to my 11 o'clock meeting with Mr. Harrison, Eleanor said firmly. I'm not leaving until that meeting occurs. Ma'am, there is no meeting. You need to leave now. I will not. Charles exchanged glances with Robert. This was going to require physical removal, which neither of them wanted to do to an 83-year-old woman, but David was clearly insisting. Ma'am, if you don't leave voluntarily, we're authorized to remove you. I don't want to do that, but then don't. Simply allow me to attend my meeting. David interjected. She doesn't have a meeting. Remove her. Charles gently took Eleanor's arm. She didn't resist physically, but she also didn't walk voluntarily. The two security guards essentially had to guide/carry an elderly woman across the marble lobby, past shocked clients, toward the brass doors. As they moved her, Eleanor's portfolio slipped from her grasp. Documents scattered across the marble floor, aged papers, official-looking certificates, letters with formal letterhead, all spreading across the polished stone. No one helped her pick them up. David Morrison stood watching, arms crossed, making sure the situation was fully resolved. Eleanor was escorted out the brass doors onto the Park Avenue sidewalk. She stood for a moment, looking back into the bank she'd been visiting for 47 years, then slowly knelt, her 83-year-old knees protesting, and began gathering the documents that security guards were now bringing out to her, rather than leaving scattered on the bank's lobby floor. David walked to the doorway and called out, "Ma'am, don't come back without proper identification and proof of actual assets. Sterling Private Bank serves serious clients. If you have confusion about where you should be banking, contact our customer service line." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she simply said, "I understand." She collected the last of her documents, straightened her dress, and walked away down Park Avenue, moving slowly but with dignity, carrying her worn portfolio that contained documents David had called ancient and invalid. Inside the bank, staff returned to work. Several clients whispered among themselves about the incident. David Morrison returned to his office feeling satisfied that he'd protected Sterling's brand image and maintained the bank's exclusive environment. At 11 a.m., Robert Harrison, Senior Vice President of Trust Services, came down from his 20th floor office for his scheduled meeting with Eleanor Vander Bergs. He walked into the lobby, looked around for Eleanor, didn't see her, and approached Vanessa at reception. "Where's Mrs. Vander Berg? We had an 11 o'clock. Vanessa blinked. "The elderly woman with the old documents?" "Yes, Eleanor Vander Berg, trustee of the VDB Family Trust." "Where is she?" David had security remove her. She didn't have an appointment and... Robert Harrison's face went pale. "You removed Eleanor Vander Berg from the building? She didn't look like a client, and she's not a client. She's the client. She controls $40 billion that funds this entire bank's operations. Where is David Morrison?" "In his office, but..." Robert was already pulling out his phone, dialing numbers with shaking hands, his face showing an expression of horror that made everyone in the lobby go quiet. Because Eleanor Vander Berg had just been escorted from the building, and Robert Harrison knew exactly what that meant. Continuing with parts 2, 3, and 4. 11:03 a.m. 25th floor, Sterling Private Bank headquarters. Richard Sterling III, no relation to the bank's founders but a convenient surname that helped his executive career, was CEO of Sterling Private Bank and the great-great-grandson of one of the institution's original partners. He sat in his corner office reviewing quarterly earnings reports when his phone rang with an internal extension he recognized, Robert Harrison, Senior VP of Trust Services. "Harrison, what is it? I'm in the middle of... We have a catastrophic problem." Robert's voice was shaking. "Eleanor Vander Berg was just forcibly removed from our flagship branch." Richard felt his stomach drop. "Say that again?" "Eleanor Vander Berg came for her scheduled quarterly governance meeting. Security physically escorted her out of the building. Her documents were scattered across the lobby floor. Our floor manager told her not to come back without real identification and real money." Richard closed his eyes. "Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I was. I just arrived for our meeting and she's gone. I called her immediately. She answered. She was very calm. She said she'd been told to leave and that she understands we no longer require her patronage." "Where is she now?" "Leaving Manhattan. Her driver is taking her back to the estate." "Richard, she didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't argue. She just said, 'I understand,' and hung up." "That's worse. That's so much worse." Richard was already standing, grabbing his suit jacket, his mind racing through implications. "Eleanor Vander Berg doesn't yell. She doesn't make threats. She makes decisions." "Have you contacted her attorneys?" "Tried. Morrison and Associates said Mrs. Vander Berg has instructed them to begin immediate Protocol 77 Alpha." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. "Protocol 77 Alpha is trust withdrawal. That's the nuclear option." "I know. How long do we have?" "The trust Charter allows emergency withdrawal with 96 hours notice to prevent institutional disruption. But Richard, the Vanderburg Trust, provides $32 billion in credit liquidity to our operations. If she pulls that money, we have 4 days before we face a liquidity crisis that could collapse the bank. Richard was moving toward his door now, his assistant looking up in alarm as he passed. Get me everything, every document, every communication, every detail of what happened in that lobby. And get David Morrison in my office in 15 minutes. No, 10 minutes. Richard, it gets worse. How could it possibly get worse? Federal regulators were copied on the Protocol 77 Alpha notice. They're required to be notified of any emergency trust withdrawal over $1 billion. By 3 p.m., we're going to have OCC auditors walking through our doors asking why we're facing a $40 billion trust withdrawal. Richard sat, down heavily. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency didn't just show up for friendly visits. They showed up when banks were facing catastrophic problems that could impact financial stability. I need every executive in the conference room in 30 minutes, full crisis protocols. And Robert, find out exactly what David Morrison said and did. Every word, every action. Because I need to know exactly how badly we've screwed this up. Part 3. The Truth. The emergency executive meeting began at 11:47 a.m. in Sterling's main conference room. Present were Richard Sterling III, CEO, Robert Harrison, SVP Trust Services, Patricia Andrews, CFO, Michael Chen, General Counsel, and 7 other senior executives who'd been summoned from meetings across the city. David Morrison stood at one end of the conference table, confused about why he'd been pulled from his branch and brought to headquarters. Richard Sterling looked at David with an expression that suggested barely controlled fury. Mr. Morrison, I need you to explain exactly what happened this morning with Eleanor Vanderburg. David shifted uncomfortably. The elderly woman who was removed from the branch, she came in claiming to have an appointment about a trust, but she didn't appear in our system, and she looked like she didn't belong at Sterling Private. I asked her to leave. She refused. I called security. They escorted her out. It was handled professionally. Professionally, Richard repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. You think having security forcibly remove an 83-year-old woman from our flagship branch is professional? She was disrupting operations and disturbing clients. She was a client. She wasn't disturbing clients. She was the client, the only client who actually matters. David looked confused. I don't understand. She had old documents and worn clothing and $40 billion in trust assets that fund this bank's operations, Patricia Andrews, the CFO, said bluntly. The Vanderburg Family Trust is our largest single source of credit liquidity. It's been with Sterling since 1876. It's literally the foundation of this institution's financial stability. That can't be right, David said. She looked like what? Robert Harrison asked sharply. Like someone who didn't care about designer labels? Like someone who wore comfortable shoes? Like someone who valued substance over appearance? Yes, Mr. Morrison. Eleanor Vanderburg looks exactly like what she is. Old money, real wealth. The kind that doesn't need to broadcast itself. Michael Chen pulled up documents on the conference room screen. This is the Vanderburg Family Trust Charter, established 1876. Current trust assets. $40 billion in diversified holdings, including commercial real estate, government bonds, private equity, and a credit facility provided to Sterling Private Bank. The screen showed dense legal text, but one number stood out, $32 billion that the Vanderburg Trust maintained as a credit line to Sterling Private Bank. That credit line, Patricia explained, is what allows us to maintain liquidity for our private wealth clients. When clients want to borrow against their portfolios for real estate purchases, business investments, or liquidity needs, we can provide those loans immediately because we have the Vanderburg credit facility backing us. Without it, we'd need to maintain significantly higher cash reserves, which would tank our profitability and our stock price. Eleanor Vanderburg, Robert continued, is the sole surviving trustee of the Vanderburg Trust. She inherited trusteeship from her husband in 1963 when he died. She's managed this trust for 60 years. She comes to our branch 4 times per year, quarterly, to review governance documents, sign updated beneficiary designations, and meet with our trust officers to ensure everything is in compliance with the trust charter. Her appointment was scheduled 6 weeks ago, Richard added. It was on our calendar. Robert Harrison had cleared his morning to meet with her. Our legal team had prepared updated documents for her signature, and you threw her out of the building. David was starting to understand the magnitude of his error. I didn't know. She didn't explain. She just said she had an appointment about trust documents, which was true, but she looked like she didn't have any money. Because she doesn't spend money on looking wealthy, Robert shouted. Eleanor Vanderburg owns a $50 million estate in Connecticut, maintains apartments in Manhattan and London, and controls assets worth $40 billion. She wears 20-year-old dresses because she's 83 years old and doesn't care about fashion. She carries worn leather portfolios because they're functional, and she sees no reason to replace them her entire life. Philosophy is about substance over appearance, about dignity over ostentation. And you judged her, Richard said quietly, based on her appearance. You decided she wasn't wealthy enough to bank at Sterling. You had security physically remove her. You told her not to come back without real identification and real money. You did all of this in front of dozens of witnesses, including some of our other high-net-worth clients who watched you humiliate and eject an elderly woman. David was pale now. I was protecting the bank's image. You destroyed it, Patricia said. By 3 p.m. today, federal regulators will be here asking why we're facing a $40 billion trust withdrawal. By tomorrow morning, financial media will be reporting that Sterling Private Bank is facing liquidity issues. By end of week, we'll have clients pulling assets, partners reconsidering relationships, and potential insolvency. All because you couldn't see past your assumptions, Robert added. Eleanor Vanderburg has been banking with Sterling for 47 years. She's been trustee for 60 years. She's never been late for a meeting, never missed a quarterly review, never given us any problems. And in one morning, you undid 60 years of relationship because she didn't look rich enough for you. Michael Chen spoke up. We need to discuss legal exposure. Mr. Morrison's actions could be construed as elder abuse, physically removing an elderly woman who was there for a legitimate appointment. We could also face discrimination claims, breach of fiduciary duty claims, and reputational damage that will cost us far more than the trust withdrawal. What's the plan? Richard asked Patricia. I'm meeting with our credit committee in 1 hour to discuss emergency funding sources if the Vanderburg credit line disappears. We might be able to replace some of it through syndicated bank loans, but that would be expensive and slow. I'm also preparing stress tests to show regulators we can maintain operations without the Vanderburg facility, though honestly those tests aren't going to look good. Robert, any chance of salvaging this? Robert shook his head. I've tried calling Eleanor 3 times. She's not answering. Her attorney won't speak to me. They've initiated formal withdrawal protocols, and there's a 96-hour clock running. Unless we can convince Eleanor to reverse her decision in the next 4 days, the trust pulls its money and we face an existential crisis. Richard looked at David Morrison. You're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You will not speak to any media. You will not discuss this incident with anyone outside your immediate legal counsel. And if we face regulatory actions or lawsuits related to your conduct, we will not be covering your legal fees. Sir, please get out. David Morrison was escorted from the conference room by 2 security guards, the same security. Guards who'd removed Eleanor Vanderburg from the bank lobby 5 hours earlier. The executive sat in silence for a moment, contemplating how badly things had gone wrong. Richard Sterling broke the silence. I'm going to Connecticut. I'm going to Eleanor Vanderburg's estate, and I'm going to personally apologize. I'm going to explain that David Morrison's actions do not reflect this bank's values or our respect for Mrs. Vanderburg, and I'm going to beg her to reconsider the withdrawal. Will it work? Patricia asked. I don't know, but it's the only move we have left. Part 4. The Estate, 3:47 p.m. Vanderburg Estate, Greenwich, Connecticut. Richard Sterling's Mercedes pulled through the gates of the Vanderburg Estate 40 minutes after leaving Manhattan. He'd made the drive in tense silence, rehearsing what he'd say, knowing that no apology would be sufficient, but having to try anyway. The estate was exactly what old money looked like. Understated elegance. That had nothing to prove. The main house was a Georgian colonial built in 1894, maintained impeccably but without ostentation. The grounds were landscaped beautifully but practically, no elaborate topiaries or excessive ornamentation, just well-maintained gardens and mature trees. Richard had been here once before, 15 years ago when he'd first become CEO. Eleanor had invited him to tea to discuss Sterling's strategic direction. He remembered being struck by how modest everything was, despite the obvious wealth, good furniture that was decades old, art that was museum quality but displayed casually, a woman who served tea herself rather than having staff do it. He'd left that meeting understanding that Eleanor Vanderberg was nothing like the typical wealthy clients he dealt with. She was from a generation and a class that viewed wealth as responsibility rather than status, that believed in stewardship rather than consumption. And now he had to explain why his bank had treated her like a vagrant. Eleanor's assistant, a professional woman in her 50s named Margaret, met Richard at the door. "Mr. Sterling, Mrs. Vanderberg was expecting you might come. Please follow me." She led him through the house to a sunroom overlooking the gardens. Eleanor sat in a comfortable chair with a book, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. She was dressed as she had been that morning, the same navy dress, the same comfortable shoes. But here in her own environment, the clothing didn't look dated or shabby. It looked appropriate, comfortable, chosen by someone who didn't need to impress anyone. "Mr. Sterling," Eleanor said, marking her place in the book and setting it aside. "Please sit." Richard sat in the chair opposite her, trying to find words. "Mrs. Vanderberg, I came to apologize. What happened this morning was completely unacceptable. The way you were treated, the things that were said to you, the physical removal, none of that represents Sterling Private Bank's values or our respect for you." "I see. David Morrison has been terminated. The security guards who removed you have been suspended. We're implementing immediate training for all staff on client recognition and appropriate treatment of all visitors regardless of appearance. We're prepared to make any other changes you feel are necessary." Eleanor listened without interrupting, her expression neutral. "Mrs. Vanderberg, I know an apology isn't sufficient, but I need you to understand that what happened today was an aberration. One manager's terrible judgment, not institutional policy. Sterling has valued our relationship with your family for 147 years. We don't want one morning's mistake to destroy that relationship." "Mr. Sterling," Eleanor said calmly, "I appreciate your coming here personally. That shows respect. But I need to explain something to you about what happened today because I don't think you fully understand the problem. Please. I wasn't upset about being removed from the building. I'm 83 years old. I've lived through enough to know that individual rudeness happens. Mr. Morrison was discourteous and judgmental, but I can forgive discourtesy. Then, what I cannot forgive is the systemic failure his behavior represents. I entered your flagship branch at 10:47 this morning. I approached the reception desk. I explained I had an appointment regarding trust documents. The receptionist didn't believe me because I don't look wealthy by her standards. She called Mr. Morrison. He didn't believe me because I don't look wealthy by his standards. They called security. Security didn't question their decision because an elderly woman in old clothing didn't fit their mental model of a Sterling client." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. At no point did anyone stop and think, perhaps this woman is telling the truth. Perhaps we should verify before removing her. Perhaps appearance isn't an accurate indicator of client status. At no point did anyone exercise basic due diligence or respect. "You're absolutely right. It was..." "Let me finish. Then after I was removed, I'm told your senior vice president came looking for me. Mr. Harrison knew I had an appointment because he'd been preparing for it. He knew who I was, which means Sterling's system showed I was expected. But your frontline staff either didn't check those systems or checked and didn't recognize my name as significant. That's a training failure. It's a values failure, Mr. Sterling. You've built a bank that judges people based on appearance. That assumes wealth looks a certain way. Designer clothes, expensive accessories, the visible trappings of money. You've created an environment where staff feel empowered to remove people who don't fit that image without verification or hesitation." She sat back. "I've watched Sterling evolve over the decades. It used to be an institution that valued discretion, substance, long-term relationships. Now it's become a bank that values image and flash. That morning, I was removed from your building. There were young men in expensive suits who were treated with enormous deference. Do you know what those young men probably control? Perhaps a few $1 million from successful tech careers or inherited wealth. I control $40 billion, but they looked right and I looked wrong. Richard felt the criticism land with uncomfortable accuracy. When my husband inherited trusteeship of the Vanderburg Trust in 1923, yes, Mr. Sterling, he was trustee for 40 years before I inherited. Sterling Private Bank was a different institution. It banked Vanderbilts and Rockefellers and Astors, but it also banked modest families who'd built wealth slowly over generations. It understood that real wealth often doesn't advertise itself. Mrs. Vanderburg, I understand your concern, and do you? Because here's what's going to happen. Your stock has dropped 12% since this morning when financial reporters started asking questions about unusual regulatory activity at Sterling. By tomorrow morning, when trading resumes, you'll drop another 10% as investors worry about liquidity. By Friday, you'll have clients pulling assets, partners reconsidering relationships, and credit rating agencies downgrading your paper. We're prepared to weather. You're not. Sterling Private Bank has $280 billion in client assets under management. You're leveraged at 12-1, which means you need $23 billion in liquid reserves to maintain operations safely. The Vanderburg Trust provides $32 billion in credit facility. Take that away, and you're undercapitalized by $9 billion. You'd need to either raise capital, difficult in a crisis, or dramatically reduce client positions, which would trigger more client withdrawals. Richard stared at her. Eleanor Vanderburg had just rattled off Sterling's financial position, with more accuracy than some of his board members could. You've spent 60 years studying our institution's finances, Richard said slowly. I've spent 60 years as trustee of $40 billion invested in your institution's stability. Of course I study your finances. I know your leverage ratios, your liquidity positions, your exposure to various market sectors. I know which of your executives are competent and which are political appointees. I know your vulnerabilities, which is why pulling the trust facility would be catastrophic. Yes, which is why I structured the withdrawal to give you 96 hours notice instead of exercising immediate withdrawal rights. I'm giving you time to find alternative funding, restructure your balance sheet, and avoid complete collapse. You're trying not to destroy us? Mr. Sterling, I'm not vindictive. I'm disappointed. There's a difference. Eleanor picked up her teacup. David Morrison treated me abominably, but I don't want to punish thousands of Sterling employees and millions of Sterling clients because one manager was discourteous. So, I'm withdrawing the trust's funds in a way that gives you the best chance of survival. But you are withdrawing. Yes, because I can't trust an institution that treats people the way I was treated today. Because Sterling has lost its values. Because the bank my family helped establish 147 years ago has become something my grandfather wouldn't recognize. Richard sat in silence, understanding that he was witnessing the end of a 147-year relationship. Is there anything I can say that would change your mind? Eleanor considered this. Tell me about the young man who will replace David Morrison as your flagship branch manager. I haven't selected a replacement yet. When you do, will you select based on their ability to assess client value by appearance, or their ability to treat all people with dignity, regardless of how they look? The latter, obviously. Will you? Because David Morrison was promoted through your ranks. He was trained by your systems. He succeeded in your environment, which means your institution rewards the behavior he demonstrated. Unless you change what you reward, you'll just get another David Morrison. I'll change it. How? The question hung in the air. Eleanor wasn't being combative. She was genuinely asking, how would Richard Sterling change a culture that had evolved over years to value appearance over substance? I don't know yet, Richard admitted, but I'll figure it out. That's honest at least. Eleanor finished her tea. Mr. Sterling, I'm withdrawing the Vanderburg Trust's credit facility from Sterling Private Bank. The withdrawal will be complete in 96 hours. I'm giving you that time to restructure your balance sheet and secure alternative funding. I genuinely hope you succeed, because I don't want to see Sterling collapse, but I can't continue supporting an institution that has lost its way. Mrs. Vanderburg, one more thing. Your flagship branch occupies the ground floor of a building on Park Avenue. Do you know who owns that building? Richard paused. I assumed it was... He trailed off. The Vanderburg Trust owns that building, has since 1947. We charge Sterling below market rent as part of our long-standing relationship. That lease expires in 90 days. We'll be offering the space at market rate to other tenants. Richard felt the second blow land. Losing the credit facility was catastrophic. Losing the flagship branch location would be humiliating and expensive. We have a long-term lease with a termination clause that can be exercised by either party with 90 days' notice. I'm exercising it. You'll need to relocate your Park Avenue branch by mid-February. Why? The lease is separate from the trust facility. Why punish us twice? I'm not punishing you, Mr. Sterling. I'm making a business decision. The Vanderburg Trust owns valuable Manhattan real estate. We've been providing that real estate to Sterling at below market rates because of our relationship. That relationship has ended, so the real estate will be leased at market rates to other parties. She stood, signaling the meeting was over. I wish you and Sterling the best, truly. You have intelligent people, strong client relationships, and a legacy worth preserving. But you need to decide what kind of institution you want to be, one that values appearance or one that values substance. Choose wisely. Margaret appeared to escort Richard out. He walked back through the house, past the understated elegance and the quiet wealth, and got into his Mercedes feeling like he'd just witnessed the end of an era. As he drove back toward Manhattan, his phone began buzzing with messages from his executive team. Patricia, OCC regulators here. They're requesting full financial disclosure and stress tests. Michael, media calling about rumors of trust withdrawal. What should I tell them? Robert, 3 major clients called, asking if their funds are safe. They're worried about the stock drop. Richard didn't respond to any of them. He just drove, thinking about Eleanor Vanderburg and her $50 million estate, wearing a 20-year-old dress, drinking tea from her grandmother's china, and calmly dismantling a 147-year relationship because Sterling had forgotten what actually mattered. The following week was catastrophic for Sterling Private Bank. Friday, November 17th. Sterling stock closed down 23% from its Wednesday opening. 2 major clients withdrew a combined $800 million in assets. Moody's placed Sterling on negative watch for a potential credit rating downgrade. Federal regulators began a formal examination of Sterling's liquidity management Monday, November 20th. Emergency board meeting resulted in 3 directors resigning. Sterling announced it was seeking $5 billion in emergency funding from a syndicate of banks. The Wall Street Journal published a detailed story about Eleanor Vanderburg's removal from the bank. Public relations nightmare, as social media amplified the story of an elderly woman being thrown out of a bank she'd been patronizing for 47 years. Tuesday, November 21st. Sterling's flagship Park Avenue branch had protesters outside holding signs. Sterling throws out 83-year-old woman and "Where's your dignity, Sterling?" More clients withdrew assets, total outflow reaching $2.3 billion. Sterling's syndicated loan request was only partially filled, raising $3.1 billion instead of the $5 billion sought, stock down 41% from Wednesday's opening. Wednesday, November 22nd. Vanderburg Trust formally completed withdrawal of $32 billion credit facility. Sterling Private Bank's liquidity ratio fell below regulatory minimums. Federal Reserve issued a supervisory letter requiring Sterling to submit a capital restoration plan. Richard Estone, Sterling III, announced he would be stepping down as CEO effective immediately. The financial press had a field day. Headlines included, "How Sterling Private Bank Lost $40 billion in one morning." The most expensive mistake in banking, judging by appearances. Eleanor Vanderburg and the death of old money banking. Financial analysts wrote retrospectives about how Sterling had evolved from a discreet wealth manager into an image-obsessed institution that had forgotten its founding principles. But perhaps the most damaging coverage came from non-financial media. The story of an 83-year-old woman being physically removed from a bank where she'd been a client for 47 years resonated with people who'd never heard of Sterling Private Bank and would never bank there anyway. It became a cultural moment about respect for the elderly, about assumptions based on appearance, about institutions that had lost their values in pursuit of image. Eleanor Vanderburg never gave interviews. She released one statement through her attorney. I regret that my long relationship with Sterling Private Bank has ended. I wish the institution and its employees well as they navigate this difficult period. I hope other financial institutions will learn from this incident that all clients deserve dignity and respect, regardless of their appearance or presentation. The statement was brief, measured, and devastating in its restraint. Eleanor Vanderburg wasn't gloating. She wasn't seeking revenge. She was simply disappointed, which somehow made it worse. 6 months later, Sterling Private Bank had stabilized but fundamentally changed. It had raised additional capital, restructured its balance sheet, moved its flagship branch to a less prestigious location in Midtown, lost approximately $40 billion in client assets, and seen its market capitalization cut in half. The bank survived, but it was diminished. David Morrison, the branch manager who'd ordered Eleanor's removal, found himself unemployable in finance. The story had been covered so extensively that every hiring manager knew his name. He eventually left New York and took a mid-level job at a car dealership in Florida. The security guards who'd escorted Eleanor from the building were suspended for 2 weeks, then returned to work with additional training. They both later said they'd never forget the look on Eleanor Vanderburg's face as they'd removed her. Not anger, not fear, just quiet dignity mixed with profound disappointment. Robert Harrison, the Trust Services VP, who'd prepared for the meeting Eleanor never got to attend, left Sterling 6 months later. He said in his exit interview that he couldn't work for an institution that had treated its most important client so badly. Richard Sterling III, the now former CEO, took a position at a smaller wealth management firm where he implemented strict policies about client treatment and staff training on avoiding appearance-based judgments. He said publicly that the Eleanor Vanderburg incident was the most expensive lesson of his career, but also the most important. And Eleanor Vanderburg, she redirected the Vanderburg Trust's $32 billion credit facility to a smaller family-owned bank in Connecticut that had been in business since 1889. The bank was thrilled to have the business. They treated Eleanor with respect, never questioned her appointments, and understood that real wealth doesn't always look like wealth. Eleanor continued her quiet life, managing her trust, supporting charities, reading in her sunroom, wearing her comfortable old dresses that scandalized people who couldn't see past clothing to character. She'd learned long ago that real power doesn't announce itself. Real wealth doesn't need to advertise. Real dignity doesn't require designer labels or expensive accessories. She'd tried to teach Sterling Private Bank that lesson by maintaining her relationship with them for 147 years, despite multiple opportunities to move her business elsewhere. But when they threw her out of their flagship branch, when they scattered her documents across the marble floor, when they told her not to come back without real money, they'd finally pushed her past her limit. Not to anger, not to revenge, just to the quiet decision that this relationship had ended. And in making that decision, Eleanor Vanderburg had taught the financial industry a lesson worth far more than $40 billion. Never judge people by their appearance, never assume poverty based on clothing choices, and never forget that the quietest person in the room might be the one with the most power. The moral. She walked into the bank wearing a 20-year-old dress and carrying worn documents, looking like someone's grandmother who'd gotten confused about which branch to visit. The teller saw poverty and confusion. The floor manager saw disruption and someone who didn't belong. Security saw a trespasser to be removed. They threw her out while her documents scattered across the marble floor, told her not to return without real identification and real money, never bothering to verify who she was or why she'd come. The CEO arrived hours later, pale and shaking, because the elderly woman they had ejected was Eleanor Vanderburg, sole trustee of the $40 billion trust that funded the bank's liquidity, expansion, and operations for 147 years. She'd come for a routine quarterly governance meeting. Instead, she'd been humiliated and expelled in front of dozens of witnesses. By afternoon, she'd initiated Protocol 77 Alpha, emergency trust withdrawal. Within 96 hours, $32 billion in credit facility was gone. The bank's stock dropped 41%. Clients fled. Regulators investigated. The flagship branch had to relocate. The CEO resigned, all because staff judged by appearance assumed wealth looked a certain way. removed an elderly woman without verification. Eleanor Vanderberg never yelled, never threatened, never sought revenge. She just made a quiet decision that 147 years of relationship had ended, because she'd learned long ago that real power doesn't announce itself, real wealth doesn't advertise, and real dignity doesn't require designer labels. Sterling Private Bank learned the most expensive lesson in banking history. The quietest person in the room might control everything, and assumptions based on appearance can cost you $40 billion and 147 years of trust. Never judge a book by its cover. Never assume someone is powerless because they look modest. And never ever throw someone out without verifying who they actually are. Because the woman in the old dress might be the one who owns your entire future.